And I always forget about that recording in progress to wait till that happens. I'll start again. Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Theresa Kavanagh, and tonight we're looking at a presentation for 70 Woodridge. This is being put forward by Ferguslea Properties. At this point, it is a proposal. It has not been submitted to the city. However, the planner from the city who's working on it is here in attendance very kindly, because this is not required for her to come, but she'll answer general questions in terms of process with the city. Any other questions would be for the team. And we have a team here to discuss what is being proposed. So the way we'll work it, because of a significant number of people, we'll use the chat function, and we will answer questions. Statements will not be addressed. You can make statements anytime, but we'll pass forward questions. Everyone will be able to read statements and questions. Okay, so that's the process. But first we'll look at the presentation, and then we'll do the questions and answers after. So I'm going to hand it over to Sharon Ravsness, who is here from Accor Village, and she'll present the team who is going to discuss this proposal. Over to you, Sharon.
That's great. Thank you, Councillor. On behalf of the team at Accor Village and Ferguslea Properties, I'd like to thank you all for coming this evening. We're excited to be able to share with you our plans for the proposed development of our vacant lands adjacent to the Bayshore Shopping Centre. Dan Greenberg, our owner, and his family have a history of over 60 years within this community, and we're committed to build one of Ottawa's most welcoming and diverse rental communities. In addition, we're looking to support a transit-orientated development that will provide quality homes, community-orientated services, usable green space that will enhance our living experience for our residents as well as in our neighbouring communities. Tonight, you're going to hear from our planners and our architects about the proposed project. We'll welcome your feedback and any questions that you may have. For now, I'm going to pass it to Tyler Yakachuk from Fotan, who's going to talk you through the application process and the timelines. Over to you, Tyler. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Sharon. Good evening. My name is Tyler Yakachuk. I'm a planner for Fotan Planning and Design, working on behalf of Accor Village, Ferguslea Properties. And as Sharon said, I'll be walking you through the planning and policy context process for the proposed developments at 70 and 80 Woodridge Crescent. Next slide, please.
Just by way of presentation, Tyler, are you seeing this meeting is being recorded badge on the screen?
I am, yes, top left.
Yeah, okay, maybe we should try and get rid of that. It's just in the top left, it's not in the center of the screen?
Top left for me, yeah.
Okay, well, maybe we can persevere.
Okay. Okay. So, as I'm sure we're all aware, the specific area we are discussing this evening is the vacant area highlighted in blue on the image to the right that fronts the south side of Woodridge Crescent beside 19 Woodridge, the Cobalt building. The subject lands have an area of 0.89 hectares and a frontage of 63 meters along the south side of Woodridge. The lands are within 200 meters of the Bayshore transit station. The lands are presently zoned residential fifth density with a height limit of 34 meters or roughly 12 stories. To build the proposed towers, we will be seeking a zoning bylaw amendment. As indicated in yellow on the image to the right is 100 Bayshore Drive, which is presently going through a site plan approval to build a pair of towers, 30 and 27 stories respectively, directly abutting the development. Next slide, please. Okay, looking at the planning policy in the existing official plan, for the site, you can see the subject lands are located in the general urban area. Typically, development in the general urban area presents in a low-rise format. However, in areas of special interest or characterized by existing height, greater heights are permitted. This particular site is located within a site-specific policy area, which are areas of particular interest to the city with regards to guidance on future development. The site-specific policy states The area located within 800 meters of walking distance to the Bayshore Station is identified as a special study area where a secondary planning process will be undertaken by either the landowner or the city to determine the future land use, height, density, connectivity, and the overall character of the community, and which may be implemented through a secondary plan and amendments to the applicable zoning bylaw. In addition to that, lands within the area need not front an arterial road to develop with greater heights. Woodridge is not on an arterial road. Buildings can be built to a permitted height of 30 stories, and connections must be made to the transit station through a multi-use pathway that goes through multiple sites on its way to the transit station. Again, we are proposing 40 stories in height, so we will be seeking an official plan amendment to permit the requested height. Next slide, please. Okay, so the City of Ottawa is presently in the process of transitioning from the existing official plan, discussed on the last slide, to an updated official plan. While the City Council has approved the new plan, it is yet to receive formal approval from the province. Until that time, the old official plan is still in effect, but we would like to cover how the new policies would affect the subject property. Most importantly, under the new official plan, the subject lands will be designated as a hub. Hubs are areas centered around planned or existing rapid transit stations. The planned function of hubs is to concentrate a variety of uses and higher density of development. Maximum permitted height in hubs is 40 stories, which is what we're proposing. Additionally, the new official plan still includes the site-specific policy for development within 800 meters of the Bayshore Station. And other requirements within hubs include commercial uses on the ground floor, a minimum of 5% 3-bedroom units, and once has been passed by the City Council, inclusionary zoning. Next slide, please. Further to the last slide, here are some additional policies within the new official plan that support the proposed development, namely that the development meets the density requirement. It is in an area that is evolving to be characterized by taller buildings, and it is located within 400 meters of the Bayshore Transit Station. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I will hand the presentation off to Richard Brisbane to give a fully detailed discussion of both the design of the buildings as well as the exterior amenity space. Thanks, Richard.
There we go. All right, my job tonight is to give you a design overview. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about context, where the site is, its history, and where it's headed. Then I'll talk a little bit about the building attributes, the size of the buildings, the unit typologies, different uses in them. And I will end up on urban design, which for us is the most important topic here, because without a good urban design, the project simply will not be successful. By way of orientation, you're going to see a lot of these slides tonight. They're plan views of the site. That dotted area, kind of S form, is the site. And I'll be using these to talk about a variety of design concepts. And at some point, you're not going to know what I'm talking about. And if that's the case, the little floating square in the right-hand corner will give you some hint as to the topic. The other slide typology that you're going to see are images of the development like this. This happens to be floating over the Bayshore Station, looking at the development. If you're looking at these and are somewhat confused as to what you're looking at, there's a small key map in the right-hand corner, and that will always have a pink arrow that will give you some orientation as to what you're looking at. There we go. So if we start with context, an aerial photograph on the left of Akura Village. The green S shape is our site. The red dotted one to the east of that is our neighbor Kingset Ivanhoe. Many of you may have seen that development. The site historically, at least for the last 30 or 40 years, has been defined by the Cobalt building, which is in the upper right-hand corner. And of course, Bayshore Shopping Centre, Cobalt's in the middle as well. And the bus rapid transit. This is a plan of those three components. So again, the Cobalt, the distinctive Y-shaped building on the left, which is some 50 years old. And as a building typology, it was truly suburban. It's a large floor plate building. It sits on a site. It doesn't particularly address the street, and it doesn't make any moves to define the landscape on which it sits. That's a pretty typical form for a 50-year-old building. And we have to remember Bayshore was actually suburban at the time it was built. To the right of our site is our neighbor's development, Bayshore Kingsets 100 Bayshore, and it's a much more urban design. So what you're looking at are the floor plans of it. It has a continuous podium, 2 towers. It's a very urban form, something that probably is more suited to downtown. It doesn't define the streetscape. It has a 3-story podium, which unfortunately has parking in it. And the front of the buildings are largely hard surface for loading and visitor parking. In the middle is the proposed development that we'll be talking about tonight. And it has 2 towers, one fronting Woodridge and the other Cobalt. And as you can see, considerably more open space. Just a quick comparison of the kinds of floor plates, and this is sort of a historical difference as well. Cobalt is quite huge, 2,000 square meters. Our neighbors on the right-hand side, 100 Bayshore, are about 1,000 square meters. And our building is a somewhat smaller one at 700 and approximately 90 square meters. Now you may wonder why that's significant, but as verticality, as height of buildings goes up, obviously shadows get longer, and the narrower the tower, the more nimble the tower, the smaller the shadow it casts, and the faster that shadow moves. It essentially moves like the hands on a watch. And at about 8,500 square feet, this is the optimum tower size that the city is encouraging on these sites now. With respect to the buildings, as Tyler mentioned, one is 40, the other is 37 stories. I think what's significant though is that both have a 2-story podium with community uses in, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. On the left, again, is the typical footprint, and you can see a plan of the units above it. And on the right-hand side, we're just explaining the parking. Each building has a parking garage below it on 2 levels, which are actually linked, so it can operate as a single garage with a single point of entry. And there are approximately enough cars for about 0.8, almost 0.9 cars per unit. And as you can see, there's a range of units between 584 and 511. The reason for that is at this point, the makeup of the units, the mix of the unit types has not been chosen. And so what you're looking at now is a floor plan of the building. It's a tight point block, and you can see the units around the staircases and the elevators. But what's important here is the client, Ferguslea, have asked us to design a building that can accommodate 1, 2, 3, and 3-bedroom units of varying sizes, so that the building could be singularly all of one or a mix of these, or certain floors with certain sizes of units. And in addition to that, the unit sizes range from 1-bedrooms, which range from about 580 to 600 square feet, all the way up to 3-bedroom units, which are 1,200 square feet. So the building has huge flexibility in terms of the kinds of units and the kinds of tenants it can accommodate. I apologize for these slides. It's sort of a urban design 101, but it's important to how we approach this site. And I'm going to read these from the left to the right in rows. And these are really the design principles around which these buildings were designed. The first one simply says urban design first. And what we're saying is that unless we resolve the community context around the site, the buildings will never be truly successful. Moving to the right, macro acclimatize, that simply says that we have to study the placement of the buildings and understand the microclimate impact with respect to wind, snow, and shadows on the surrounding community, including our new neighbors to the east and obviously the existing Akora. Radiate, use sustainable design practices. Really what that means is that we're trying to create units that have more than one frontage, that have corners, so that we can get cross breezes through them and different kinds of sunlight, more humane units. Lower left, scale and step. So the towers are pretty monolithic, but what's important with high rise is not so much what's in the tower, but how it addresses the street. What happens when the building comes down to the street? Does it reinforce and help define the streetscape? And does it have uses that promote the vitality of the streetscape? And we'll talk about that again. In the middle is back to the parking, and it simply says that not only does the parking and the servicing have to be intuitive, but it should be as far away from pedestrian activities and any other amenity spaces as possible. On the right hand, we're talking about accessible. The City of Ottawa now has accessibility standards for indoors and outdoors. All of those need to be integral to not only the building, but the spaces around the building. On the other upper left-hand corner, the placement of the towers on the site is hugely important, not only for our neighbors, but for our own buildings. And so we have to take into account how they affect one another and the tenants will be in those buildings. In the middle, porosity and connectivity. This site is essentially a gateway for Akora Village to move through to the transit station and from the transit station back through the spaces and the site. So it has to be designed not just to accommodate those, but to really facilitate them. Gateway and ambassador, and that's just an elaboration on the same thought. As the transit station opens, more and more people will be using transit to get to Akora Village, and it will ultimately become the primary gateway, the primary entrance to Akora Village. And so it really has to be an ambassador for Akora's brand. Lower left-hand corner, not only are we trying to bring people through the site, but we want to create community spaces, community amenities, gardens, walkways. And so we have to determine how we can do that and still accommodate the buildings that we're looking for. Last two, thanks for staying with me. Sustainable design in the center. This just simply says that we all have to realize that climate change is real and these buildings will be designed with the highest level of sustainability and smart technology. And the last but not least is landscape. This is something that our firm believes deeply in, is that green and landscaping are essential to defining, what essentially is Akora Village's legacy is a very green space. And we'll talk about how we're going to do that. So, urban design massing studies, why do we have towers located where they are? And the simple story is that we looked at a number of different arrangements for towers. Initially, we thought 3 towers would be the optimum, but as we looked at all the other things we were talking about, the open spaces, the connectivity, et cetera, we felt that rather than having a 25 and a 30-story tower, perhaps if we went to 2 slightly taller towers, we could get rid of one and better accommodate the kind of urban design that we felt was more appropriate. So we ended up with a configuration which looks much like this. And below it, parking garages. And to get to the point, 2 parking garages are like a combined one, but in 2 pads below grade. And you'll see here that there's an entrance, a primary entrance that feeds into those 2 garages. That's the orange arrows, the orange arrow. And what that tells you is that all the drop-off traffic, all the in and out traffic to the parking garage does not come off Woodridge Crescent, that all those turns and queuing and stacking take place on our own site. So we were minimizing transit difficulties. And just to show you what that looks like, this is an image looking to the southwest, and you can see a car coming out of that parking garage. And on the left, you can see visitor parking and drop-off for the northern tower, all taking place independent of Woodridge Crescent. Then over to the other tower, which is the western tower, you can see shipping and receiving and a car going down into the parking garage. Since we did this initial concept design, I think we've determined that this second entrance into the parking garage is probably redundant and unnecessary. So connectivity, how does Akoura Village pass through the site? How do all the residents move from the community center? And by the way, nobody's mentioned, but there's a new master plan being put forward for the next 30-year growth of Akoura Village. And so this site becomes a keynote for that. And so the question is, how do we do that? And I guess the simple answer is, well, you put a path to the west and a path to the north and a path to the south and start connecting and providing as many options as possible. But obviously, a path in and of itself is pretty utilitarian. And we have issues like accessibility, multimodal scooters, bicycles, etc. And more importantly, we have issues of wind, microclimate, safety, lighting, places of respite, benches, etc. And so the solution becomes not a utilitarian pathway, but in point of fact, a public realm, a set of boulevards or esplanades that cut through the site. And that ends up looking something more akin to this. So we're using trees and low landscaping to provide buffers to sun and to snow, and obviously to provide privacy and isolation from some of the resident spaces. This is the pathway looking from, as you approach from the LRT station into the site, but these pathways cross. So again, this is, if you were on Woodridge and Akoura coming into the site to get to the transit station, this is the crosswalk, the new podium to the Northern Tower. If you're coming from Cobalt and the second Western Tower, this is the axis that's passing. You're actually looking towards the transit station here, but you can see the colonnade of trees. And by the way, obviously these trees are mature, but this axis is the axis between the two lower parking garages. And so we have a deep soil mass here, which can accommodate trees. And then overall across the site, we will have a minimum of a meter, 900 to a meter of soil for all the landscape that we're showing you. And then if you're down at the MUP, which services along the Queensway and moves up to the LRT station, this is the view from the south to the north up to Akoura Village. So that's connectivity. Then the question is, what about the spaces? What can we contribute to Akoura Village and the residents as they pass through these spaces? And that gets into the stitching of both public, privately owned public spaces and public realm itself. So these are what we call POP, which means they're for the public, for Akoura residents, but they're obviously owned by Akoura Village. And they are to the northwest of the upper tower and the southeast of the lower tower. And so this is a view of one of those amenity spaces. In this case, we're thinking maybe a splash pad or a play area. In the podium, we're hoping that there will be, dental office, doctors, and certainly daycares and those kind of community uses. So this may be an appropriate use. And this is just a sense from that walkway down the kind of space that we're envisioning off the podium level. And then looking from the other tower down, we have a more passive space, landscape, public realm space between the LRT station and ourselves. And that space is intended to be more flexible. So it's open, it doesn't have as many things in it. You could have a garage sale, you could have community picnics, it can host a variety of things. And obviously just passive amenity space as well. We're going to have close to 600 units, population of 1,500, potentially 2,000 people, and they need amenity space themselves. So this is a resident public space. This is on the Western Tower, just looking down. It has a terrace space with loggia, barbecues, plaza, probably a splash pad or a small soaking pool, chaise lounges, etc. for the amenity of the users of that building. And then if we switch over to the North Tower, we have an area that has both hard surface and green surface adjacent to their podium, which is likely to have a fitness, etc. center in it. And you can get a sense, the landscape and the trees are giving it a certain amount of privacy and a certain sense of less public, a little more semi-private for the residents of the towers themselves. Again, if you're not following me, the little box in the corner says this is about scale and step, and that's really how the building meets the street. What happens when these towers come down to grade? And we have 2 podiums and 2 stories for each podium, and the intent of those is to house community services. So this is the Woodridge East Tower. This is the building you can see fronts the street, defines the streetscape. There's no parking or vehicular movement. And the idea is here is you'd have optometrists, coffee shops, daycares, etc. Community uses that you can't find in a regional shopping center, but are appropriate to a Akoura village. And if we go over to the other tower, again, the same kind of podium. In this case, yoga studios, fitness, again, medical offices, anything like that is appropriate. And the client is committed to, in fact, finding those tenants and housing them. Last category, thank you for being so patient, is landscape. And quite frankly, in my business, I tell my clients that you can spend $100,000 in a building on doorknobs and hinges and it disappears. You can spend $100,000 in landscape and it is transformative what landscape can do. We live in a city with 4 seasons, which means our landscape is so much richer than most. And we have great examples. People travel from around the world to see the Gatineau trees, to see mosaic. It is just spectacular, and we take it for granted. And at little cost, we believe that we can utilize this for the microclimate reasons, but also just to enhance the beauty of the open spaces and to set a new standard for the Akoura brand. So what you're looking at here is into that more passive space, the use of firebush and lavender and typical indigenous stone 5 landscaping. Again, if you're looking, this is an aerial looking down. The multi-use pathway goes from the LRT station into our site and then drops down and runs along the Queensway. And this is the landscape between our site and the LRT, and just shows you what that path could look like. And ultimately, just as you're moving through the crosswalks, north, south, east, west, utilizing the same landscaping to provide an intimacy, to windbreak, and just a sense of ownership. Again, an aerial from, if you're floating above the Queensway, just to give you a sense of what those axes look like. And then I'll just back out and show you a few. I'll move away from the buildings to give you a sense of what this looks like. Ultimately, you've probably heard that this is a gateway site. This is where the Queensway breaks and splits down to the 401 and continues out to Canada. And it is really considered by the NCC as a gateway as you approach the city coming into it. And we'd like to think that these two towers are going to have the elegance and architecture to be distinctive, but more importantly, that the landscape and foliage at the bottom will help differentiate them from most. Thank you very much for your patience, and I'll turn it over to the councillor in questions.
Okay, there we go. I was not able to unmute myself. Thank you very much, because I guess I dropped off from being a co-host. Thank you very much. I see that there is one question already. Hold on, and I will. Thank you, Ian. And it's regarding secondary planning process. How widespread will this process encompass? In the end, does such a plan arrive at identifying needs and wants for the entire surrounding area with widespread consultation? This is a process question in terms of, is there going to be a secondary plan? The issue is that this is one project. And I've talked to the city about it. Their recommendation is that this is not a secondary plan process. But I'm going to pass it on to Laurel in case she has anything to add.
Thanks, Councillor. And yeah, that's correct. We're treating this potential application very similarly to that of its neighbor of 100 Bayshore, where they're exempt from the secondary planning process as required by the site-specific policy. That's also the reason for part of the official plan amendment, in that we're dealing with a single lot for development purposes. The rest of the land holdings in Acorah Village under Ferguslea's name is much broader. It's much bigger. It extends, north to Carling. So if and when the time comes that Ferguslea would like to develop on a larger scale, that'll be the time where we talk about a secondary planning process for the balance of the lands in Ferguslea. However, for the purpose of this application for the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw, we'll be treating it the same as we did for 100 Bayshore.
Okay, thank you. Kevin Brewer is asking, how does this align with the new official plan? I guess this proposal.
I guess I'll take that one. So I mentioned it a little bit in a couple of my slides, specifically that the city is really looking for density around transit stations. As we mentioned, this is within 200 meters of the transit station. So that's really a place where these designations of hubs are located. Specifically, it permits up to 40 stories in this area, which is what we're going for. We're not asking for anything more than the policy suggests. And then, as I also mentioned, we meet the density requirements. We meet the idea that the area is going to be characterized by taller buildings, that we meet the high-rise guidelines, and that high-rises typically are just generally permitted within 400 meters of rapid transit stations. So even though we're going in under the old OP, there's a myriad of policies in the new one that we comply with.
Okay, thank you. We got a question from Nicholas on are there existing buildings in Ottawa with similar footprint design?
Yes, and this is kind of a tried and true template. Most of the towers in Vancouver are of a similar footprint. Most of the towers below the Gardiner Expressway in Toronto are a similar size footprint. It's a nice balance between a mix of 8 or 10 units per floor, and it's a fairly efficient building from a structural point of view. So the short answer is, yeah, there are a lot of these.
Is it possible to list some examples that we could give later for people to look at?
Well, if they look at any of the Concord ADEX towers in both Toronto and Vancouver, most of the high rises are in a similar footprint size. It's not atypical at all.
Okay.
I mean, for example, in Ottawa,
You're probably more familiar with looking at that stuff, but if people aren't as familiar, if you could send examples, we'll make sure to share them.
well, a good example in Ottawa, of course, would be Bill Mahatra's icon at Dow's Lake.
Okay, that's your comparison. Okay, for Dow's Lake. Okay.
That's a similar footprint.
Okay. Kate is asking, her question is for Ferguslea. Can you give a quick summary of where you see Acorah Village going? What is the future of the whole community, including a time frame?
I can probably answer some of that one, Councillor. We have a vision, as we've been working in Acorah Village since 2011, and we've spent millions on capital investment in Acorah Village, developing the village. And we plan to continue the development of the village over the next few years with much more capital investment. There's not really a timeline. We have a vision of what we're going to do to the community. And this is just a part of an enhancement to our current community.
Okay. Are these units going to be rental?
They are all going to be rental, yes.
Yeah, okay. Yes, that's actually pretty standard these days. Not too many condominium buildings being built because there is a shortage of rental, and that's where developers are, that's the direction they're going. Bill Fenton's asking, will there be an official community consultation meeting? And will there need to be a zoning change to exceed 30 stories?
I can
Do you
take
want to
that,
take that,
Councillor.
Laura?
Yeah, no
Thank
problem. So yes, so similar to Bayshore, for official plan amendments and zoning bylaw amendments, the city considers planning committee the official meeting as required under the Planning Act. It'll be up to Councillor Kavanagh if she would like to host an additional community information session once the applications have been submitted. But for the purposes of public consultation meetings, all members of the public are welcome to attend planning committee once a date has been confirmed. And members are welcome, like they did for 100 Bayshore, to speak and present at these meetings. But as for any other additional meetings, it will be in the councillor's purview if she wishes to hold one. Your second question there about zoning, yes, there will absolutely be a zoning bylaw amendment required. I think Tyler at the beginning had outlined that. Maybe I missed it, but yes, like right now on the site, there's a height limit of 34 meters. So the zoning would have to be increased in terms of height. And then if they're looking to add any other uses that are not currently permitted in the residential 5th density zone, that's something else that would need to be adjusted through the zoning. And if there's any other performance standards that Ferguslea is looking to amend, that would be done through zoning as well.
And I will be holding another meeting. This is over and above, because this is before an application has even gone in, which is not typical. I want to get you the information as quickly as possible. And then I will, once the application is made, because they could make some changes yet. Perhaps they're going to, get feedback for more feedback. Then we'll have another meeting. And as well as Laura stated, planning committee is also the meeting where the public can make delegations. Okay, the next question is for me. Andrew Hayden Park is Bayshore's backyard, but it's Crystal Beach Lakeview's backyard too. And the drawback is that it seems to be picnic tables and barbecues. Residents go there with their families. When actually Ferguslea is to be commended for adding picnic facilities in the community behind the recreation center. Yes, they do, and they have a barbecue area. The facilities seem to be appreciated. My question is, will cash in lieu of parklands, because there isn't any more parkland, be used to create picnic facilities in Bayshore Park to take some of the pressure off Andrew Hayden Park? Well, if you're talking about Bayshore Park, there is not enough room for a picnic area in that park. It seems like it's a large park, but it's got baseball diamonds in it. It's got a hill there that is used for sleighs in the winter, etc. It is not. It's got the field house at one end. It's got other things going on, because I know, because I've taken a good look at it before to see. But in terms of cash in lieu of parkland, well, frankly, I'd like more parkland rather than cash in lieu. I think that I would like to ask what they're considering doing with the back lot. And Danny knows, because I asked him outright, what would he consider doing with the back area that's not going to be developed? Because I think that would make good parkland. And I take your point. We want more green space. And if there's any possibility of doing that, I think that should be looked at. I think everything should be asked for in terms of more green space. Ian is asking, the previous official plan required a full secondary plan prior to any development at Bayshore Station. Now it appears the city is walking away from that commitment. How does an overall vision for the area get established before one-off developments possible conflicting with the eventual vision for wider community? Who are you directing that to? Ian, you want that in terms of me, or do you want to hear from the planner? Because I think it was, frankly, I think now I realize that if we would, when 100 Bayshore came in, it was considered a one-off, and it probably should have been a secondary plan perhaps back then. And I'm seeing that now in terms of the similarity of these two projects. However, the thing about a secondary plan is that it's implying that there's going to be change everywhere. I'm working on a few secondary plans, and it implies change in the whole area. I don't know if we're ready to have, asking for more density in throughout Bayshore, because that's what would happen. It would look at what the set of what's there now. The other part of it is, other parts of, whatever the catchment is of Lakeview, Crystal Beach. Are we looking at more density there? That's what would happen if you had a secondary plan. And I think that it's probably better if we look at it in terms of this development. Since there is no plans beyond this, they're not changing the rest of the property. I mean, this is sort of unique that it's one property owner in an entire community. The last thing I want to see is a Heron Gate where housing that is affordable at the moment and quite adequate gets taken away. That would be my concern if we look at further density, because that's what a secondary plan would do. Okay, Connie has put in the chat here questions that were sent in earlier, and with the answer provided by Ferguslea. Will current Akora Village residents be given preference to the apartments for 70 Woodridge as they become available? And the answer is existing Akora Village residents will be most welcome to view and apply to move into apartments when they become available. As we are in a very early stages, the buildings will not be built for several years. We will share more information on the application process in due course. What will be the construction hours? While construction will not commence for at least 2 years, you may be rest assured that it'll be undertaken in accordance with all applicable City of Ottawa bylaws, and will make every effort to avoid and minimize any inconvenience to Akora Village residents. Bill's asking, the density of Bayshore has already exceeded reasonable level. Can density and height be reduced? I do not understand the response to Akora Village's plans. Do you want to comment on the density of Bayshore, Laurel? I don't know if you have any. I think we have some information on that. I don't know if I have it.
I don't have any handy right now. Just more of I think a general statement would be is when we're looking at this parcel, this vacant parcel, and we looked at 100 Bayshore, I think what's really important is that we have to look at it in its proximity to transit. These parcels are some of the closest ones to transit that are left in Akora Village. And, the province is guiding us towards intensifying near transit stations. Our current and new OP are guiding us to intensify near transit stations. So, if we don't put density here, where do we put that density? We're trying to encourage people to use the LRT system. So we have to build up in these scenarios on these vacant parcels where there is transit. So the question about density being exceeded, I don't know that that's necessarily fair, since we will see more density here. And Councillor Kavanagh answered the question before about a secondary plan. Is that something that you really want? Because secondary plans add density. Go speak to the people in Manor Park. Like, that's what's happening right now on a large scale. They're going through a very similar process, and density is being added there. And my belief, is, and I've said this time and time again with 100 Bayshore, transit is the driver to this density. Well, the rest of Akora Village, if it, develops over time, will it be something similar to this? Maybe not. They're not as close to the transit station as these two parcels are. As you get further away, closer to Carling, is there that need for density? You know, maybe not. And when they do, if and when, you know, Ferguslea comes in with their plans to develop the rest of the land, we'll have to see, you know, what's going on with transit at that point, how the rest of the neighborhood is developing. But for the purposes of this application, this is something that we definitely want to see here.
And Bill, you said you don't understand the response about Orcora Village's plan. Do you want to take that, Sharon, or pass
I
it
can
on?
expand it a little bit more. What I'll just say is our concentration for the next foreseeable future is our current buildings and our current infrastructure, and renovating, upgrading those, modernizing those, and looking at the landscape around them, and upgrading and fixing the landscape around our current buildings. Does that make more sense?
Okay, well, we'll see. Okay. Kate is asking for Laurel, existing traffic infrastructure for Woodridge Crescent and Bayshore is over capacity. How do you propose to fix all modes of movement in a changing community with 100 Bayshore and 70 in the plans?
So first, I'll start off by saying I'm not a transportation planner, nor am I a transportation engineer. So I can't answer that question, even if I wanted to. But also, an application has not been submitted for this property, so we don't have a transportation impact assessment for me to even be able to comment on. And we have staff in-house who will attend the future meeting that Councillor Kavanagh will have. So I'll bring transportation staff to that meeting. So Kate, if you can save that question for when the application is submitted, I'll have someone here to answer that question. But for the time being, there's no application, so I can't comment.
It does have to be looked at. Traffic infrastructure does have to be looked at. And I've been speaking to the schools in the area, the two schools, and that's important, safety and students and the walkability of the community. So I think that's got to be a priority, is walkability. There was and there still is a proposal for example, a crosswalk that would be roughly near 100 Bayshore to cross Woodridge. So that has been proposed and planned. The only reason it's being delayed is, well, there's a number of things with pandemic and future construction, but these are things that have been committed to. But that's important, and I think the walkability of the community has got to be a priority. Frankly, if the traffic's a little slower, I'd rather see the emphasis being put on cycling infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure. I think that's the most important part. Okay, Michael Fleming. With respect to design, often see proposals with very attractive renderings, but the final product ends up value engineered. Given the closing remarks from Richard on the design excellence, does Regular see any issues delivering the architect's vision? Thank you for the opportunity to comment. Also, the urban design review panel, would that be involved? I don't know if that's a question that anyone knows the answer to at this point, which might be related.
Hi, this is Brian Casagrande from FOTEN. I was just going to say, I don't know if Laurel can confirm that for me, but I'm pretty sure this does warrant a visit to the Urban Design Review Panel, just given our proximity to the transit station.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. I didn't answer because I wasn't sure if FOTEN was going to take it. So technically, this application and 100 Bayshore are not required under UDRP, the Urban Design Review Panel, also known as UDRP, under their guidelines to attend. It's technically only things that fall within a design priority area, which typically are on an arterial main street such as Carling, or traditional main streets down in Westboro and Bank Street. However, we have asked both 100 Bayshore to go and this project as well to go as a courtesy. We think that UDRP would be valuable here. So yeah, I think you guys have agreed previously to it, Brian. So yes, UDRP will play a role in this as well.
Okay,
Yeah, I
thank
mean,
you.
I think we all see the value and a visit to UDRP and welcome that. No issues.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
UDRP has no bearing on the question, Ryan. The question is, will in fact the integrity of the design be maintained? I think that's a Ferguslea question.
Okay,
Our plan is to hope so, absolutely. If this is the design we're putting forward, it's the design we hope to actually complete, yes.
thank you. So it's a long-term strategy to develop one building at a time, so to avoid a secondary planning.
I think
Do you
I
wanna-
can try and answer that as well, Councillor, but Laurel can confirm if she sees it the same way. I don't see the merits of any other properties in the Bayshore community where we would be prepared to advocate for not entering into the secondary plan process. So this isn't, to me, a marching of tower after tower into the community. I think the fact that these towers are actually surrounded by the transit station, by Woodridge Crescent, and by the proposed and existing high-rise buildings makes them uniquely separated from the community, and that's the fundamental merits that I think Laurel was touching on when she was answering this question earlier.
The secondary plans that I have been involved with, which I've talked about, is when there's a secondary plan, it's about the intensification of the whole area. It means you're looking at further densifying. So if you make this, if this was a secondary plan, which it's not, it would mean looking at the townhouses, looking at the neighboring communities for the purposes of intensifying more density, changing the zoning, and so on. So at this point, that has not been looked at. I don't think that would be a benefit to the community at this point. Bill is asking, having following following infrastructure issues be addressed. Currently, no storm sewers for Core Village, where all storms water communities to the west, 100 Bayshore, unable to go into ground for parking because of spoils. What has changed? Major safety issue with congestion on Woodridge Crescent. Baseline BRT may require expropriation of lands because not properly studied. Building directly on flight path of migratory birds, Andrew Hayden Park at capacity. Okay, so in terms of the storm sewers for Core Village, is there anyone who can answer that at this point?
Actually, yes, we have someone here, Stephen, if you can unmute yourself from our servicing team who can perhaps give an answer to that one.
Hey, yeah, in terms of the storm servicing, so this for this project is similar to what we did with, or what was done for 100 Bayshore, is that per requirements, and this is typical across the city, is that the storm discharge is, because currently it's an open grassed area and completely uncontrolled flows. What is required is a discharge restriction up to the 100-year storm, so a very rare but high volume storm, down to the it's a 2-year or quite a common typical storm at the pre-development level. So the entire development will be controlled, and that's controlled through through on-site stormwater detention and discharge rate restrictions for this, so that the site itself is not does not further contribute to the known ongoing issues on along Woodridge and overall.
Thank you. We've already talked about the fact that there's not a traffic study with the combination of buildings. So that will get addressed if you're talking about traffic on Woodridge Crescent. Baseline BRT, that issue was discussed before with 100 Bayshore. There were concerns that there was going to be need for expropriation of lands. We had talked to OC Transpo about this issue, and they have said that is not required. So, so I believe that that has been dealt with. In terms of building directly on the flight path of migratory birds, I believe that is looked at in terms of what's required in terms of the checklist. Laurel, can you put me up to date on that? Because I think there was some new guidelines.
Yeah, I always mess up the title, bird-friendly design guidelines. So, you know, ensuring that we don't have, for lack of better words, I can't think about it right now, bird casualties. So there's certain design features, and I'm sure Richard could speak much better to it than me, certain materials that are used to avoid these instances, but it's something that we ask applicants to look at, are the new bird-friendly design guidelines. Is that what you're asking, Councillor?
Yeah, no, there was new guidelines put forward, and we certainly want new builds to have them. That's absolutely essential. This came up with 100 Bayshore as well, of course, and there are recommendations. There is a guidebook. It got presented at I believe it went to planning committee and was accepted. So there are guidelines in place. So it's an important question. In terms of Andrew Hayden Park at capacity, we were talking about that. I'd like to see more green space for sure. Why not use enormous tracts in the core of the city to address density? That is part of the official plan, is that density is going to be throughout the city, the urban area. This is considered an urban area as well. So density is happening downtown for sure. It's happening, happening in Westboro, Hintonburg, Alta Vista, Blair, Gloucester. It's throughout the city. Okay, Lucas is asking, I'm appreciative of extensive greenery Accor Village is proposing on the subject property. Will Accor Village contract a company to ensure that all vegetation is maintained and watered regularly? Do you want to take that?
Absolutely. We have a groundskeeping team currently at Accor Village to maintain the greenery around the community at the moment, and they're excited about the project, and they will definitely want to keep this looking good when we start it.
Thank you. Okay. And Anita, wouldn't it make more sense to understand what traffic the community can handle prior to creating intensification developments? Well, you have to have what you're proposing, and then at this point it's a proposal, and it does get studied in terms of what the traffic implications of that proposal is. So I don't know how you put the cart before the horse, but you have to know what you're proposing to decide what, or to understand rather, what traffic the community can handle. So so those are looked at, I guess, in tandem. I don't know if you have if anyone has any further comments on traffic studies. Is anyone, Fotan, taking that on?
Yes, I can point out that David Hook is here from IBI. He's the traffic consultant on the file. You're correct that the study hasn't been submitted yet, but we certainly make sure, as we're anticipating a design, that the transportation as well as the civic infrastructure, the engineering side of things, can support it. So as we're anticipating X number of units, we're asking David, hey, David, do you think you can support this? So he then will look at what he looks at to make sure that, you know, we're on proper footing. So I let him elaborate a bit more, but that's the process that we go through.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Yeah, I just wanted to point out that a lot of the new development that's occurring in this area is in fact transit oriented, and so the traffic impact of these new developments are going to actually have a minimal traffic impact, where most of the emphasis is on transit users and active transportation. But on the other side of that too, the implementation of LRT in this area is going to have the effect of driving down the rate of traffic growth in the background. And according to the City of Ottawa long-range modeling, the implementation of LRT in this neighborhood is going to have an at least a 10% jump in ridership to existing residents of Acorah Village and the surrounding community.
Okay, thank you. And like I said, in terms of the traffic study, we keep talking about cars as if that's the only thing that moves around. We got to look at cycling and infrastructure, and we have to look at pedestrian infrastructure. So I think those are very important, that there's an emphasis on those. Okay, this is Lucas is asking, will both towers be constructed at the same time or one after another? Anyone want to take that, Sharon, to have someone who can?
Richard, I can answer it too. I think we're going to wait until closer to the time. They're planned to be built at different times or at the same time. So when we get approval and we actually decide what to do with the market conditions, we'll work out whether we have the market to build one or have the market to build two. So decision made later down the line.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, Kate is asking, will the garden homes stay garden homes?
They will stay garden homes. Our investment in those is just to make sure, as I said earlier, is to upgrade them, the current homes that are there. So they will remain garden homes, yes.
Thank you. How can traffic be minimized or reduced with an additional 500 parking spaces being added, plus the additional vehicles being added to 100 Bayshore? I don't think anyone.
That one. Yeah, I can handle that one again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, it's again the majority of traffic generated by these developments are not vehicular. It's right next to the transit station, and there's lots of active transportation infrastructure planned. But the important thing to note is that the amount of parking being supplied is mainly driven by a marketing need, which Ferguslea has established through their management of Acorah Village. And it's well under the maximum rate of 1.75 spaces that per unit that's actually permitted by the city in adjacent to a rapid transit station. And so the rate that's being proposed is actually quite reasonable based on the expected demand and compatible or similar to rates that you would see in other cities around North America in this context.
What is the ratio again, please?
It's 0.7, what is it? 0.78 to 0.88, depending on the unit mix.
Okay. Okay. I don't see any further questions at the moment. Oh, there's one. The location of the two 100 Bayshore towers and the North 70 Woodridge Tower blend into one continuous block of towers when viewed from the northwest direction. Can something be done to fix this? Is that a Richard question?
Yeah, it's probably a Richard question. I'm not sure that it needs to be fixed. I think really the streetscape is defined by the podium level, not the towers, which are set back. and the podium levels of both buildings are actually contributing more significantly to the definition of a defined streetscape. So I think there may be a sense that those towers are dominating the street, when in point of fact, it's the podium that define the pedestrian experience.
Okay, well, that's good questions. I appreciate it. At this point, you can still write in and send us more questions if you wish, and we'll guide them to the appropriate person to answer. I appreciate everyone taking their time to come out and oh, there's a question here. Okay, good question. Sorry, let me just read this one because it's a previously submitted question. Are there minimum requirements for affordable units and accessibility? Great question, Anita. At this point, it's still negotiable, and I certainly would like to see affordable units. But because there is no bylaws or rules in place yet, because the province hasn't given us the ability to do that in terms of mandatory levels of affordable housing. So at this point, it has to be negotiated. We did do that with 100 Bayshore, and I would strongly be requesting that again. It's absolutely essential if you're talking about living near transit, especially in a neighborhood with a couple of schools. There's going to be more children potentially, so I think it's important. And of course that does affect the design of the units. I've already stated that with Ferguslea to talk about the fact that larger units are more important because that's for families. So if we're going to designate affordable units, they should be ones that can accommodate families, because they're the ones that are usually in the most need for affordability. So so that's a good point. Okay. Did I miss anything else just before I go? Yes, yeah. And in terms of, just to touch on the accessibility standards, I don't know if that's your department, Laurel, or if Sharon, you can refer somebody, but there absolutely is accessibility standards so that the building is accessible. But I'm not an expert on the details of that.
So I can answer part of the question. So for planning, we kind of control what happens outside of the building. We don't approve interior floor plans. So, you know, whatever happens within the units, that's up to the owner. We don't have authority under the Planning Act to say what goes on inside the building. We'll look at things on a general level, but for accessible units, we don't. That being said, the outside of the building, anything on the outside of the building within the building envelope, we do take a look at, and it has to meet the AODA standards. And that goes for, you know, depressed curbs, materiality. And I should also say, when an application is submitted for site plan control, it is circulated to our accessibility advisory committee. So there are people on this committee who specifically take a look at the applications with an accessible lens when they're doing their review. So for the inside, I'd have to defer to maybe Sharon. I don't know on how you plan on doing the interior, but for the exterior, we will take a look at that.
Yeah, and there's building code, of course, which is provincially regulated.
Yes, of course.
I can answer. Richard, I don't know if you want to jump in as well, because we've just looked at initial designs for the interior and we're open to everything, and it will be something we'll be considering when we actually land on what unit types we're putting in there, how many bedrooms, and that'll be one of the considerations, absolutely, that will be taken into consideration.
Yes, and I certainly encourage fully accessible units be included.
In our experience, well, first of all, we adhere to all the CODA, and in fact, there are so many accessibility standards that what we do is we have a matrices of them all, and we choose from the most strident of each of the code standards. And obviously the City of Ottawa applies here, but there are other ones that are more stringent. But in our experience with residential facility buildings like this, there's usually a percentage of units that are designed as completely accessible. So the notion of counters and by accessible, you know, we're talking about hearing, sight, all aspects of disabilities. And normally a certain percentage of units will be designed to accommodate those.
I would suggest that you reach out to Council on Aging, because I just recently had a meeting with them talking about aging in place, which is happening, of course, everywhere. And there's buildings that are called NORCs, which is, it's an acronym for naturally occurring retirement communities. And that means that people are growing old in place. They're in an apartment often, and they start there at a certain age and they're still there, but their needs increase over the years. And one thing that Council on Aging pointed out is that there's just a few fixes that could be made. That this is not full-blown accessibility, like wheelchair accessibility, but just to help people in terms of daily living as they age. There are a few quick fixes that they just recommend, just on their experience of working with the aging community. So I'm sure you're probably familiar with it, but I just wanted to throw that out there, because that is actually the majority of the accessibility needs. It's things for people who are getting more arthritic or having more trouble opening doors and things like that. Anyway, that I'm just throwing that out there because that's where the trend is going. As you know, Bayshore happens to have the largest number of seniors, and a lot of them live in towers. They live in the Amblesides, they live in the apartment buildings, and there'll probably be a good number of them living in these units. So those are things to look at. So thanks for raising it, Anita. I appreciate it. So I think that's a good way to end off, and questions can still be submitted. So this is a preliminary meeting, and when there's an application that is put forward, we will definitely be contacting you, giving you all the information, and we'll be having another public meeting. I didn't tell Accor Village that, but I think they know that. I think they pretty well know that we were going to ask that, and I think that that just makes sense. Planning committee's just not enough. You do need these extra meetings. So thank you very much for coming out, and thank you to the team from Ferguslea. Thank you to the community for taking the time and asking your questions. And thank you to my staff, as always, for helping out, and Laurel for coming out over and above as a planner. They're very busy people right now. Okay, enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care.